G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I've done an off-peak video because I've just downloaded Revit 2021 and I just wanted to share some of the new features that are included with the program for those that are either trying it out or about to download it eventually. So I'm sort of ordering them in how much they excite me. Some people are ordering theirs differently, and I'll discuss that as I go through. If you want to see some more videos that cover it in more detail, I will show like some of the things in context. But Autodesk has a blog article where they show nearly every single thing in detail. So I guess the question probably most people are thinking is, should I upgrade? 2021's out, let's upgrade our models. I'd say don't. Usually best practice is to wait until the second service pack. By this point, Autodesk has tested their products much more and people have sent all their feedback back to Autodesk by that point typically. So you might have more motivation if you're an engineer. You will see that there are some features that engineers get out of this upgrade over architects, but yeah, I wouldn't say upgrade yet. The first feature I'm going to show you, which I think is great, is the orientation of text in annotation objects. This has been overdue for a long time, especially in the context of view markers. So if I jump into Revit 2021, just in a project here, and I just go and grab a section head, I think I may have already updated this one, but I'll show you how I did if it's already updated. But if I rotate this against Project North, no, so it didn't update. Notice how the text always stays the orientation of the section head marker. This can be a big problem when you're trying to create a section marker that's wider than a circle because all the objects rotate, but the text doesn't rotate as desired. So what you can actually do instead in this annotation family, if I open up my section head field, you can tell this object to rotate the text with the component, which is really powerful. So if I just update my section head now, notice everything just moves with the component as it moves. So this might help a lot of people trying to design some custom section and elevation heads that they couldn't get to work before. So it's got some use. It works for tags as well. So if you want to tag a certain object like a table that's at 45 degrees, you can tell your tag to rotate with the table instead. So a really interesting new feature. Definitely one I'll be playing with. The second one, which I think is great, is parametric voids in families. So the ability to turn off voids using a visibility control. Originally, we used to have to do things like put a parametric depth control on a void and only push it into geometry under a certain condition controlled by a visibility statement. So in this case, this is brilliant. So if I just make a new family, I'll just make a generic model family. I've got a lot more templates in different languages now as well. I noticed you might have just seen them there. Don't know if that's new to 2021, but I don't think I've seen them before. All right, so I'll just make an extrusion and I'll just pull it up a little bit to give it a bit of bulk. And I'm just going to copy this extrusion over and I'm just going to turn this into a void and I'll cut. So that's nothing new. That Revit could already do that. The thing that's new is this control here under graphics called cuts geometry. So I can tell that to stop cutting in the family, and I can also associate it with a visibility parameter. So I can just say is cut. So this could be really useful for something like a vision panel cutting through a door, because typically the vision panel would be a nested family and you could face host it. But as well as that, sometimes you might want to make it a shared family, which means that it can't cut the door panel. So it's really powerful to be able to have that control to tell a void to stop cutting. So if I load this into my family, just overwrite, and I place one of those. Obviously the void's off at the moment, but I can just tick the void on, and you can see that the void can be controlled in this way. So there's a lot of potential for family and content creators for how this could work. I'm really excited to see what I can do with my door families, for example. But yeah, very cool. So really great improvement. This one is much needed. They obviously reacted really quickly to user requests with this one because they'd only just introduced the linking PDF option in the last update. I think it was a 2020 feature, if not 2019. Pretty sure it was 2020. So you'll notice now that on the Insert tab, you've got a few more controls, and you can actually link PDF and image or import PDF and image, which is fantastic. So most people might have not realized, but before in Revit, if you inserted an image, it added itself to the model. So it didn't draw on the linked path anymore, and it added its full file size to the model, which is terrible. Because sometimes you do want a high resolution image in your model, but you don't want to add, say, 40 megabytes for one image to your model. So what you can do now, I'll just create an image just by doing a little snip. Just move my snipping tool over. I'm going to get in the way of myself, aren't I? I might just get myself out of the way. You can see the canvas I work with for my videos. So I'm just going to save this just to my desktop as an image test. And instead of the insert image option that we used to have, we now have link image. So you can treat it a bit like a DWG. So I'll just link this in, and you'll see that I've still got the same sort of controls I had before with my proportion control. But now if I go under manage links, I have a new section that controls my images instead. So you no longer have that manage images dialog. I think this is great. I mean, obviously this is getting quite full now, so hopefully there's not too many other file types they need to add to this. But you can see you get a lot of controls over it and whether it's currently loaded. In this case, you can see whether it's in the project or absolute. So in this case, I can update something to be what we call an import. So if I say import, it becomes a part of the model, but until I do that, it's not part of the model. I can also import images as well, so I can just import an image from the start. But having this ability to set images to linked is amazing. I mean, this is going to be a game changer for model management and file size. So I can also just place new instances of it from there as well, which is nice and easy. And I can also just link in a PDF as well, so I can link PDF. Just bring in this test one that I made earlier, and you can pick your DPI you want it to come in at. Let's just say 300. And I just place it, and again, I can just reconstrain the proportions. As well as that, you know, if people weren't aware before, you can enable snaps on PDFs as well, so I can actually snap to vector objects in my PDF, which is pretty powerful. So you can see that there's a lot of control still present in the tool. But now under manage links, under PDF, I've obviously got this available as a link as well, and I can also reload from, so I can give it a new source. So really powerful to have this feature available now, and it's great that Autodesk reacted so fast for this request. So good work there. There's a lot of what I call quality of life improvements. So essentially I'm going to show you 4 new features really quickly, but there's the option to add row stripes, highlight the selected row you're currently on, zoom in and out, which is long overdue, and freeze the header row. So if I just jump in and create a new room schedule, just under view schedules, I'll just make a room schedule. And in this case, I'll just add a couple of fields. I'll just add name, number, and area, and I'll just say OK. So the first thing we can do in a schedule, I'll just change my face to where my rooms are, is we can zoom in and out. So this is something that I always wanted to have in schedules, because obviously when you're working at this distance, it's quite hard to see, and you might have noticed I'm impaired for vision, so it's harder for me. The ability to zoom in and out is most welcome, and obviously you get active scrolls once you get to a certain point. Notice I can also freeze my header row, so I can just act normally, or I can just freeze my header and my header remains, which is brilliant. So much more similar to Excel. I can also go into appearance and I can change my what I call row stripes. So I can add a color to my first row and I can add a color to my second row. And I can show stripe rows on sheets or not on sheets, it's up to me. So it can just be to aid you while you're viewing your schedule. But there you go, you can see that you can really quickly update your schedule with all sorts of horrible colors like that. As well as that, you notice that when I go to a certain row, it's highlighting the row that I'm on. So this is new as well, and this is going to make people's life a lot easier, especially when they're working with really long schedules like door schedules. So a really exciting new feature and long overdue, but most welcome to have in Revit 2021. Number 5, which is a lot of people's number 1, but I've got to say it didn't excite me that much, but I guess this is a really long overdue feature as well, is the ability to slant walls. It's almost become a bit of a joke in Revit that you could almost never put anything onto a lateral angle, everything was straight up and down. Well, finally we've got one way to stop the naysayers. So if I go on 3D and I just make a new wall, I've got the option under the properties of the constraints to change the cross section from vertical to slanted, and I can then type in an angle, or I can click and drag the handles up the top. So pretty cool. I mean, we couldn't do that before, obviously. I can also curve a wall, so if I place an arc-based wall, this should also support. I'll just place an arc-based wall. This also surprisingly supports slanting. So I didn't expect it to be able to handle that. But I guess essentially it's really just creating a blend or a swept blend or a loft, as you might call it. What you can do also, which is pretty cool, is you can actually place openings in them. And obviously that's pretty rubbish. They're all sitting vertically. I'll just pick some single doors. You notice the opening cuts right, but the door doesn't. The opening just cuts parallel. That would obviously have been pretty dreadful if that's how they worked, and would have made the tool pretty useful. Luckily, doors now have an orientation command where you can slant and bring it back. In terms of the height of the element, it looks like it remains at the right height parallel to the surface, which is great. So it's pretty much what you'd want it to be. In terms of how the door behaves when, say, you swing it in and out, I think it would swing parallel to the normal that it's placed at. So it's not 100% perfect. You might want some different behavior that still operates parallel to the floor plan, but pretty cool. And I think as well as that, if you go to like a floor plan, I reckon you still get the symbology cast in the floor plan. I assume it's still parallel. No, it's not. So that is one constraint that you also get, I believe, that all the symbology is also raking. So you don't get the perfect graphic representation of your element in floor plan, unfortunately. I mean, you do technically get the right swing depth, but it might look a bit strange if you put dimensions on it in floor plan. So pretty cool. As well as that, you can also change these to curtain systems. I didn't expect you'd be able to, but it does support sloped curtain system elements, which is pretty cool. And I think even sloped curtain system elements, which obviously, as we know, they facet typically in Revit. So an interesting new tool. We'll definitely create a lot more sloped walls in the world in future, I'm sure. Now that we've got the tool available, we'll probably be a bit more brave in Revit than we were before. But interesting tool, but didn't excite me that much given we already had masses that we could place sloped elements onto. Number 6 is just a little quality of life improvement in the filters. So if you add a filter, you can now enable or disable the filter, rather than have to remove the filter altogether. So if I just add a schedule, and I'll just add a schedule based on a rule, and I'll just call it walls. And all the schedule does is just takes all the walls. If I add this, and I just make maybe the filter turn my walls transparent, obviously by default, all my walls are going to be transparent. But maybe I want to just sometimes not enable the filter. And then instead of having to remove the filter, you can see I can just toggle it. So the main thing that I think this is going to be useful for is auditing templates, where you have certain audit controls that you want to toggle on and off, say overriding certain categories or making certain elements transparent, but not always. So it's going to let us mix and match our filters a lot more. So I think that's a really exciting and interesting improvement to the filters. Another one that doesn't excite me that much, given we already have so many tools that can do photorealistic real-time rendering, is that the realistic mode has been pretty much completely overhauled. So the original real-time ray tracing mode is now gone, and the realistic mode sort of takes its place. So if I just switch my view, I'll just turn off that rubbish filter I made. So if I just turn this view into a perspective instead of an orthographic, and I just go into realistic mode, so you notice there's no longer the real-time ray trace. I should just begin looking at the model in a more realistic visual style, and it's going to be much more realistic than it used to be. It looks like it's almost like pre-rendered. It's literally rendering the scene, and it's not too slow. Like usually my laptop would start whirring and making a lot of noise when I used to go into real-time ray tracing mode. So it's not as slow as I expected. Let's just do interior artificial only, turn my shadows down a bit, and just add a background sky. And we'll just turn off edges and turn on anti-aliasing. So I'm pumping up the the performance a little bit now, making it a little bit harder. And if I just walk around my scene and just sort of just come down into my building, look around, I can actually get pretty close. I picked a pretty awkward perspective to start from here. I'll just rewind until I get inside the building. But I can pretty much walk around as if I'm in like one of those sort of Enscape or Twin Motion style programs. Obviously this model is not a very attractive model to walk around, but it's obviously very different to what realistic mode used to be like. I'm in a very awkward perspective at the moment, so it's not the best demonstration of the tool. But if you were in a better perspective, you could do it. But notice how you see reflections on the chrome now, whereas in a realistic mode before, it used to just be black because it couldn't process the reflections. Likewise, on top of that, if you have any artificial lights, they should also now cast real light. So this bar light here, for example, is casting light in the scene. And the glass is, getting little reflections picked up on it. So it's an impressive new feature. But I guess if you already have Enscape or something like that, it's not that useful. But I guess it's nice to have for those that don't want to shell out for a license for one of those programs. Number 8, which is a small one, but interesting, is that there's a UI customization. So you have the ability to customize how much you see on the ribbon. So when you first open Revit 2021, you might get a message a little bit like this, where they ask you if you want to personalize your workspace. Personally, I just said, don't show me this again, because I like my workspace. But if you do go start, it will prompt you to turn off particular panels depending on your discipline. If you're like me and you've already pressed don't show this again, you can actually just go into options from file, and you can just go to user interface, and you can turn off whole tabs. I can just say, I don't want to see structure, I don't want to see system tabs. Let's turn all of those off. I don't want to see massing and site. And you can see that it sort of starts limiting what's on your user interface, which is actually pretty handy for most people. There will be some things I'll probably turn off eventually when I'm working, but given I do educational videos, I don't usually want to hide certain tabs because people might get confused and go, where's your tools for mechanical, for example? I can't see them. So I think it's better to probably keep them on if you're doing education, but useful while you're working to sort of limit how much you see. So pretty cool. Number 9, which for a lot of people is probably more exciting, but not as exciting for those that might be using Grasshopper, for example, is Generative Design tools. So Project Refinery, which was in beta, is now actually integrated into Revit and Dynamo. So essentially this tool runs Dynamo studies for you and runs them over and over again with variables that change as the study goes through, and you essentially generate multiple studies to analyze the best outcome. And it gives you the option to return the results of those studies to Revit in some way. So I'll show you really quickly how one of these studies looks to run. But I guess if you've used Galapagos or Wallisai or one of those really powerful generative solvers in Grasshopper, this might not excite you as much, especially if you can use Rhino Inside and literally just run them straight into Revit. But if you don't have one of those available and you do want to run a study, I'll just go to a floor plan. And we're just going to study the optimization of where we can place a seat in a room to get the best views. So I'm just going to go under Manage, and it's just over here in the Manage tab. I'll go Create Study, and it takes a little bit of time to boot up. We're just going to maximize window views. So we're going to select an element to calculate the view from. In this case, we're just going to pick a little chair. We need to select the windows that we're interested in. So I'm just going to select multiple curtain panels in this case. And this is using a limited selection tool, which I'll cover soon when we look at Dynamo. If I go Finish, and we'll just select the room that we're working within, and any obstructing elements. So in this case, we have a fireplace, and we have a chair. I'll just take that out, and we'll add those. And in this case, we're just choosing our variables, setting our constraints to score. So we'll just say, what's our view to outside score from a range of 0 to 1, and we'll just do it 0 to 100. We'll just turn off the angle, and you can change how many studies you run, how many generations, how many seeds you take. Obviously the more you add, the more complicated it gets. You can also change your study from an optimization study, but in this case I'm just going to generate my study from here. So you'll get a new dialog that opens up, which is actually a different tool in the ribbon. It's the Generative Design tool, and I'm just running a study here. So essentially it's just generating a few studies, and in a sec it'll start showing us as they generate them. I found it pretty quick. It depends on the study, of course, and how your Dynamo script works that runs the study, so it varies. So this should pop up in a sec. It is a little bit slow sometimes. It's not like the speed of Galapagos, for example, in Grasshopper, but it gets there eventually. In this case, it'll be generating a pretty basic study. But hopefully it finishes in a sec. I do have an old study, if not, that I can just look at instead, which is tempting. Starting to generate. It's getting there. I do wonder if it's being sent to a cloud to generate the studies, or if it's integrating it within Revit itself. I'm guessing it probably is integrated within Revit, but maybe if it's going to a cloud, that might be why it's taking a while, because I don't seem to be able to go to a past study. It seems to have sort of locked up. What I'm going to do is just leave that running, and we'll come back to it. So generative design. So number 10 is path of travel. We have more control over path of travel tools now, which is pretty cool. So this tool, has some use. I haven't used it a lot, to be honest. I don't typically need to usually check path of travel. I'm still using a pretty old workflow, which is actually just to draw a railing and get its distance, to be honest. Depends on how complicated the study is. But if I do a path of travel from, say, here to here, it's going to go and tell me the path. Originally, I don't believe we could change the start and the end, but now you can actually move the end and also move the start, and it recalculates, which is pretty great. So you can update the path of travel. You can also add waypoints to it. So this is sort of like adding control points to a spline. So you just keep adding your waypoints, and then once you've got them, you can actually move them around. So you can actually force the path to go through particular points, which is pretty neat, and pretty relevant too. Sometimes you do want to force your path to take particular journeys to get to a certain point. So it's pretty impressive. It's a much more useful tool now, and I'm sure I'll use it a lot more. As well as that, you've also got the option to toggle the mode under Analyze. You can reveal obstacles, so you can see what the path of travel tool is actually considering. In this case, you can see that it's not considering the couch or the chair. The reason this is because the couch and the chair are actually quite low. There's a mezzanine step down in this floor. But you can see here, everything in orange is being considered as an obstacle, which is pretty cool. I don't know if there's the option to tell things to stop being an obstacle specifically, but I know there is some options under the path of travel tools where you can tell it what to consider as obstacles and what not to consider, for example. So saying, do not consider these model categories as obstacles. So for example, by default, doors aren't obstacles, because if a door's shut, you can still go through it by opening it, obviously. So that's pretty cool. So that makes that tool a little bit more useful. As well as this, number 11, which isn't that exciting, but might be useful for some people, is you can now see the origin points of links when you turn on this category. So I've got a structural model linked in here at the moment. I'll just isolate the structural model. And if I just turn on, actually I've already got them turned on, but if you go to site and you turn on project base point, survey point, internal origin, you'll be able to see them in gray. So you can see here, this is the survey point of this structural model. Likewise, you can see that's the project base point and also the internal origin. So pretty cool to be able to see where they are in each model. Usually you used to have to go into each respective model and have a look to figure it out. So that's a really nice welcome feature that'll be quite helpful for coordinating models. We'll jump into Dynamo now. I'll just quickly check if that generative study is finished. Hopefully it has. Oh, it's still going, jeez. Far out. Okay, it looks like there's some performance issues with this tool maybe. Maybe it's a little bit slow sometimes. I did manage to do a study before. Yeah, it's still going. Okay, it looks like it might be coming out. I'll just look at one that I already did. So I did this one before. So you can see here that it's finding like the optimal viewpoints just by running the study, and you can obviously measure the fitness of which ones are the best score. In this case, it looks like there might be some parameters that still need to be configured. In this case, I've only got the position in the room, so I can limit it by certain outcomes between two variables. But once you're done with it, you can actually create the Revit elements that the study used. So if I go create, it'll actually go and place the chair in the optimal spot in the room. I don't think it did in that case. I'll just double check again for that particular study. Creating elements. It didn't seem to create it unless it's underneath the chair. No, it doesn't look like it did. So I think you must have to generate the elements right after you've done the study. But I think I'll probably leave this one for now because it looks like this study is not gonna finish. It seems to be struggling. Well, that's a shame. But yeah, it does work sometimes. Anyway, Dynamo. So as most people know on this channel, I'm pretty big on Dynamo. So I really wanted to know what had changed in Dynamo 2.5. There's a really detailed description of what's changed here at this link. So I recommend reading that if you're a Dynamo enthusiast like me. But generally, one of the biggest changes for me is performance. I've noticed the speed of Dynamo is much faster, especially when it comes to geometry and scripts with lots of different nodes. It's much, much faster. We're still not talking like Grasshopper speed here, but it's much faster. There's also new nodes, and these have probably come from custom packages where people have it's absorbed custom nodes. There's not too many in 2.5, but I'll at least point out the ones that I noticed. So there's a lot of new ones for elements. So you can get all the materials from elements. And you can also say whether you want paint materials as well. I don't think this is in 2.3. You can also get intersecting elements of category that intersect with another element. So you can do a little mini class dissection, essentially. If anyone's ever used the Genius Loci package, you'll know that this is quite a handy workflow. As well as that, you can get the hosted elements in an element. So you can get the doors from a wall, for example, which is pretty handy. So I think that's a nice little node. There's a set of nodes that deal with joining of geometry, which I know will be quite useful for structural engineers who are trying to join, say, all their columns and their floors and their beams, or unjoining them. So they're really helpful. As well as that, there's also 2 nodes that deal with pinning. So you can now pin and unpin elements in Dynamo, and also check if an element is pinned as well. As well as that, there's a little sneaky thing that's come in called, I think it's got a special name that we'll check in a sec, but it's just it calls itself extensions when you enable it. So if I just boot up Dynamo, I think Dynamo Player's got a little different icon now as well. So in Dynamo, if I go to View and I go Show Workspace References, you'll notice I got a little extensions dock there, which is pretty cool. So if I just make Dynamo a little bit bigger, if I place a custom node, say a steel connection node from a custom package, which I'll talk about soon, and refresh, by default, it doesn't look like it's picking up that one. It did pick up one of these ones. There we go. So it at least recognize this one. So it's actually picking up a Generative Design node, and it's telling me which package it's coming from and which version the node's coming from as well. So if anyone's ever used the Monocle extension, it's a little bit like that. Probably not quite as powerful, but still pretty cool. And I know a lot of people are actually working on ways to abuse or use this space. Definitely check out the work of John Pearson. I've seen he's been playing with this a little bit. And some other people that he's been talking to on Twitter that I've seen going around that are trying to work on ways that they can take advantage of this area. So pretty neat. While I'm here as well, I'll probably point out that we do have some generative design nodes called gate and remember. So you can block downstreams using a gate, and you can also just hold on to data for a future study. So it's pretty handy for setting up those generative design scripts. Later on the channel, I'll probably make some videos about how to use the generative design tool once I know more about it. For now, I'll probably leave it. So that's pretty cool. As well as that, we've got a whole set of steel connection nodes now embedded in the default library, and some generative design and Revit nodes. And there's a really cool set of nodes that I'll show you, which I really like. So what we'll do is just turn our extensions off. So those steel connection nodes are under Revit steel connections, and there's a lot of nodes under there, so definitely have a look at them. I assume they've just been reappropriated from the original steel connection package. But if we go down to generative design and we go to selection, there's some really cool selection node options here. And I didn't have to install this. This came with Dynamo by default, I think, when I just added the generative design tool. So if we just do, say, select wall elements, and I just go to 3D, you might be familiar with the select model elements tool. Oh, actually, I'll find a better view than that. I'll just rename this so that I can create a fresh 3D view. And if I do select wall elements, and I go to select, I'll just go manual, just make a new one, and I go select. Notice I'm only able to select walls, so that's pretty cool. I did see this actually shown by John Pearson already when he was playing with Dynamo 2.5, but this is a really helpful selection method so that you can really easily bulk select things without having to worry about filtering out all the other elements that don't meet that criteria. I look forward to exploring the API behind this method later on, but for now I'm probably not quite at that point. But you can see there that all I've selected is walls, and you've got different options too. Family instances, select multiple family instances, model elements, so you can really filter out what you're selecting, which is really cool. So you could filter out all 2D elements, for example. So if I do a select here and I filter out model elements, I assume it's excluding, it looks like it's picking most things actually, so I'm not quite sure how that one is limiting what I'm selecting. Maybe it's just built specifically for the generative design tool. But some cool new little tools there as well. As well as that, the package manager's been quite heavily improved in my opinion. The speed is much faster, and there's a couple of features that have been changed. So if I just jump into Dynamo, packages, search for a package, boots up the package manager, it seems to be a lot faster. It connects to the server quicker, and it finds packages faster as well. So originally I found that this was quite slow and unreliable, but I can now see that it's really quick and it's much more accurate. As well as that, you can filter by package. So I think at the moment it's only filtered based on people that have tagged their package since this came out. So I think at the moment you can only see ones people have bothered to do. So nice work on getting in there first, I guess, to this person. But you can filter out by, say, Civil 3D. So that's pretty cool. Obviously Frank Wang's getting pretty busy. So I think that's going to be really useful once more people start using Dynamo than just Revit users, which is already happening. So pretty neat. As well as that, before I move on, you can also see that they've taken away the downvote option, because I think originally people were accidentally just pressing downvote when they went to expand the package. So there was a lot of downvotes that weren't true. So instead now we're just weighting them by the amount of people that have bothered to press the upvote button, which I think is a good addition. As well as this, there's some other features that I won't really demonstrate, but I'll just mention because I think they're important for people to be aware of. So there's some work sharing improvements. BIM 360 is now available from the homepage in Revit. There's a new data server that they've added in Europe, so I know that Europe's going to be getting much better BIM 360 speeds, which will probably give them a lot more competition with Nemetschek as well, which might be their motivator. As well as that, MEP, when you model an element or you edit an element, I think you check out more than just that element now. You check out the connected elements as well. So this will fix some old work sharing problems that came out of that. Engineering, there's some improvements as well. I'm not really that savvy on engineering in Revit, so I won't demonstrate these. I'll just touch on them, and you can look up other blogs and videos to find them. But there's a lot of new categories under infrastructure in Revit now that you'll be able to find, which is used for, I think, bridge modeling, for example. So I think if you jump in here in visibility graphics, we've got a new category called infrastructure. So I think if I just turn these all off, you'll see here these are all very new. They're all quite different. Like you've got bridge cables, bridge decks, railings. You've got all your structural categories still there. You've got vibration management. So these are all quite different. So I'm sure people will find ways to make use of that. I know a couple of bridge designers using Revit that will love this. As well as that, structural modeling, there's a lot of improvements. They're all sort of listed here, but I just recommend checking out a blog. There's a lot of rebar improvements and a few new things like being able to edit the profile of a lot more elements, such as beams, and being able to place elements in section and elevation. As well as that, if you're an electrical engineer, you've got a few wins in this build of Revit. You can now name your circuits more easily, or you can name your circuits. When you place a panel schedule on a sheet, you see it under the sheet's contents, and you can do single phase panel boards. So there's some quality of life improvements for you there. And if you're working with Revit for analysis, they've actually integrated the mechanical and the structural analysis modules into Revit now. And you can also send Revit models to Inventor 2021. So anyone doing design for manufacture or fabrication might find that there's some new workflows enabled through that. So my verdict overall is it's not bad. It's better than some of the other editions of Revit we've had come to us in the past few years where very little has been added. I remember, I think it was Revit 2020 where it felt like it was almost just import PDF and path of travel, at least for architects. So I think that there's a lot of improvements they've added, a lot of quality of life improvements, which I think are really important. And I know there's a lot of cool things coming for Dynamo as well in the new version of Revit. So definitely try it out if you've got access to it and see if there's some things that might help you once you make the jump. I'll put this presentation on my GitHub if it helps anyone. But thanks for watching today, and if you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. I've done this video ad hoc in the middle of all my other ones, so I'm going to keep doing my Python series around this video, so don't worry, I'm not going to stop doing my other videos as well. I just wanted to share this as soon as I could, because I guess it's quite relevant right now. So hopefully that helps you, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Thanks, take care, bye.